film about prophecies and predictions. Prophecies are said to be the likely outcome of events or causes that have been set in motion unless human beings make course corrections. They are still alterable. A prophecy is something which is, to some degree or other, still alterable. Predictions, they say, are events that are carved in stone. They're just ironclad and they cannot be changed. What are those? They're generally things of a more cosmic nature, like the movement of planetary bodies or extraplanetary bodies, or even earthquakes or volcanoes that aren't directly connected to human activity. And they can be another thing. They can be a prophecy that has gone past the point of no return. So, the prophecies and predictions are generated through an understanding, intellectual and often technologically assisted, of the laws of cause and effect. We have prophets all over our world. We have weathermen and architects, flight engineers and astronomers. We've got people that calculate financial markets. All the people that are the prophets in our world are making projections to varying degrees of accuracy and success. Some of them we don't allow much of a tolerance. We don't want a structural engineer or an aeronautical engineer to crunch figures and design something and it doesn't work because we'll be flying on it. And we don't want a pilot to not be able to understand all that he's been taught and how the information he has helps him to get us somewhere and he doesn't know what to do with it.
Well, give me a laundry list of what prophecies that Meier has relayed through them.
All righty. Well, let's see here. There's a lot to cover. Where to start? Well, let me do it this way. When Meier was only, what was it? I think he was 14 years of age in 1951, and this is freely accessible on my website. I'll give you just some of the highlights or lowlights of some of the things. First of all, this was composed in a long letter that one of his teachers helped him with, and 3,000 copies were sent around the earth to the various governments as well as to different organizations, etc., but he didn't receive any responses. And in here, in various places, for instance, I think it's actually, I have a list here. In number 21, he speaks about the destruction of the ozone layer and the increasing storms. This is the first place that I saw that he mentions this type of thing. He goes on, monstrous deluges and all these things, landslides and avalanches, earthquakes. He's predicting that all of these things are going to become ever more frequent in number and ever more violent and destructive. Now, that's a little generic, that, isn't it? But the ozone destruction was not being talked about. I didn't know about it in 51. Maybe someone did, but I didn't have the internet then. He speaks about unnatural climate change that is going to affect the world very detrimentally. Al Gore, you've been beaten to the punch. But it's not a matter of taking any joy in that. It's just that this was published 57 years ago. He's spoken about massive weight of structures like cities and villages and dams, how they adversely affect the tectonic structure, giving rise to volcanic activity, and how this is all interconnected, and more earthquake activity as well, and that it's going to start to be exacerbated, especially where there are volcanoes that are connected together worldwide, i.e. the Ring of Fire. He also is the first person this long ago that I know of to speak about the problem that you can loosely translate as illegal immigration. In a non-racist or offensive way, he describes, and we describe it in the film, there are mechanics to things in life.
He described something about two conflicts centered on Iraq. Right?
That's in the 1958 prophecies as well. Yes.
And the second one sounds like it's really bad news, could be still on the horizon.
Well, no, let me tell you, let me just finish with a couple highlights of 51, because he refers to televisions, which will belong to every family, and the computer, and that they will become the most important sources of information linking people up, and for advertising, etc. He's things like, music problems, well, I'm jumping around. New epidemics from animals to people. Let's remember that in this case, in this theory, the AIDS connection came from the ring-tailed monkeys and was not created in a laboratory, as a lot of people want to assume. He, in 58, you're talking about when he talks first in this one paragraph about the Soviet Union being dissolved no later than 91, East Germany being reunified, and then he says an Iraq war will be led through the U.S., through their country's president. He goes on to say that there will be a second Iraq war under the leadership of a president who will be the son of a former president, and that war will lead to an unbelievable disaster. That is the war that we have right now. I mean, I only know of 2 Iraq wars and 2 presidents that are connected as father and son. He speaks in 58 of worldwide terrorism. He speaks, he gives the dates of the coming moon rocket launches by the Soviet Union and the U.S., and he, in there, probably to the delight of some conspiracy theorists, says while there were 5 genuine U.S. moon launches and landings, the first one was a hoax. In a later translation, it is described that that was accomplished with the help of Wernher von Braun and, of all people, Walt Disney, that Wernher von Braun's right-hand man, Ernst Stuhlinger, was actually taken up on board a craft where Meier and Semyaze, one of his contactors, read this guy the Riot Act and blew his mind, and he begged them to not reveal his complicity in this and not say anything until after he died. And Meier thought the guy was dead, but he's actually still alive in his 90s. So that's the thing. I mean, in this particular document, and that's the 1958 one, he names AIDS and cell phones and genetic manipulations and cloning of humans and animals. I mean, this has now been coming into the news in the past few years. I've got a lot of this stuff. I mean,
I guess the question, Michael, is what predictions or prophecies are there that could be pending now? You know that Meier said them, but they still haven't come true, other than this second Iraq war leading to a planetary
Well, there's
catastrophe.
other stuff in there. I mean, in the same thing, he says, you know, terrorist commandos are going to live secretly in cities worldwide and then suddenly unleash, you know, hell on earth, biometric tagging of people through data chips. Of course, that's being talked about now, but he said that's going to come first through the USA, then the European Union, which has been intentionally set up as a dictatorship in its own right. At this time, here's an interesting one, because this is a real whopper to corroborate. In the same article, number 46, he talks about the discovery of what he calls new solar satellites that are far outside of the orbit of Pluto that will first be discovered after the turn of the millennium. Well, it just so happens that not only did Meier talk about this in 58, he was talking about this in 1978 to Wendell Stevens, who published it in a book that has a 78 to 1980 outside copyright date. That's called a slam dunk. It's in there. And those satellites, those moons, or, suspected planets or pseudo-planets beyond Pluto were only discovered in the past couple of years. This is here. I've got the book. We even sell Wendell's little CD that's got the information in there. People can look at it for themselves.
Is there anything, does Meier ever say anything about these visitors, these ETs, revealing themselves, coming down to reveal themselves on a wide-scale basis?
Yes, they're not going to do it. Here's what's happened. They had 3 bases on the planet, physical bases. One was in Switzerland, one I think was in China, and one somewhere in the middle of the U.S., I believe underground or in mountains somewhere. They will no longer be found, or never be found, I should say, because the ETs, the Plejaren people, are no longer based here at all. They do maintain a craft with a couple of people that circle the planet and are monitoring all the time, and they have little monitoring crafts that absorb information and what have you for, processing. And Meier is visited still on a fairly regular basis by one or more of them. They will not interact with us. There may be something else, but they will not interact with us for another 700 years. Closed case, forget it, they ain't dropping by. There will probably be some contact with extraterrestrial races if we survive ourselves here. Other races, or at least another race, and there was going to be a contact back in about 98 that got aborted, and there's a very weird story I can tell you real quickly about that. The kind of craft that were described to Meier, they were going to be a rounded, globe-shaped craft that would bring extraterrestrials who would have contact, and the contact would come to the U.S. This is where it was going to happen, apart from the fact that contact was offered by the Plejaren to the U.S. in 79, but that's a story covered in the film. Okay. But then, due to developments that were on the horizon, the Plejaren advised these people to not actually land. Now, a friend of mine who is not a UFO guy but a real master photographer is up in Mammoth. I think it's in 98 or 2000, whatever the heck it was. And he's snapping photos of the mountains. He takes beautiful stuff. And one day he calls me up. He says, "I'm sending you something. This is for you. I don't know what this is." And he blew up because he saw this little speck, and he thought maybe he's got a $5,000 lens or whatever. So there's this round, golden, globe-shaped object hovering up above the mountains in Mammoth,